All right. So as we prepare to discuss the two tough calls we have to make, we were given the readings on employment at will. So just in quick review, um, employment at will essentially um, applies whenever there's a lack of duration specified in a contract.
Yeah.
And that essentially allows an employer to discharge an employee at any time for any or no reason with or without notice.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are uncomfortable with this, saying, there should be some form of notice. There should be some form of clarity as to people not getting abused or disregarded in that matter. So we find the limitations and expectations. There are three general things that fall under most of these. So we want to just clarify what those three are real quick.
Yeah.
The breach of an implied contract. What did you feel that was?
I just felt like that was more kind of like they're talking to you and kind of saying, it's going to be this way. It's going to, like, we're making these promises. Well, I guess not necessarily even promises, just kind of talking about the job in a certain way, and kind of giving you these expectations, and then them kind of faltering on that.
Right, and I guess it's a part that's kind of like a false pretense.
Yeah.
When all of a sudden, you're getting good reviews, and you have, like you said, over the next 6 months, we expect sales to be going really well. You're a huge part of that. Thank you. All of a sudden, you have that assumption. Well, I'm aboard this team. We're doing well because of me. I'm safe. Right.
Right.
So the next one, talking about an implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. This was dealing more with like employers who are trying to get out of trying to pay like that last paycheck,
Yeah.
or avoiding paying benefits or sick time or something like that. And so it's just like, oh, don't try to cut people short.
Yeah. No, for sure. For sure.
Right. And then the violation of public policy.
Oh, yeah. What was it? It was the terminating employee, because they basically refused to do something illegal for the employer.
Right. Yeah, they have the examples of trying to lie on documents or something like that. What was interesting on the discussion prep for the leader, there were some other things brought up too, like what about if I take time off to serve on jury duty? And I thought that was an interesting point. Like you can't fire me for that.
Yeah.
And later we also read about the whistleblower. So
Yeah. Yeah.
And this was an interesting one too. So this one confused me a little bit. It talked about filing for workers' comp, and I kind of thought that was under the good faith and fair dealing.
Yeah.
Because I was comparing that to like that last paycheck kind of stuff. Workers' comp may be something of a different source rather than coming from the company itself. So that could be why it's considered public policy instead.
Well, I know companies are required to have workers' comp on their employees if they employ over a certain amount. I think it is. So
right, exactly. So that's what I mean. I think that's that's hence why it's public policy and not the good faith, fair dealing one.
Yeah, yeah.
So anyway, and then lastly, it talks about, and this is at the end of that reading, talks about all of the anti-discrimination statutes, which we went over in the very beginning of the semester, like the race, origin, gender, religion, Disabilities Act, and then like the age discrimination. So none of that was fortunately too new for us, I don't think.
No, definitely not. So yeah, I agree.
Excellent. All right, so moving on then a little bit into the case. It says we're supposed to discuss. We're going to talk about Terry first, and then we'll talk about Phil with the same questions.
Yeah.
So for Terry, a financial obligation. What does Terry have on the company's bottom line?
So from what I saw, I mean, basically the explanation for Terry in the case was he really wasn't doing much to help. In fact, he really wasn't contributing at all to the company, is what the manager had said. Basically, he was taking down notes, like different suggestions and stuff, and not really, I don't know, thinking about them himself and executing them. So he wasn't really doing anything for the company, and he's just collecting a paycheck essentially.
Right.
I don't know. That's what I saw with Terry.
Okay, and that goes right into question number 2, which we'll come back to both of them as well. It says, what obligation does the manager have to the company based on that information? And it says, according to the manager, Terry makes no contribution, just like you pointed out. So all of the salary and benefits are pure cost. He has no return on his investment.
Yeah.
In a company that is only making $300,000 in a year, Phil seems to be, well, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. Phil seems to be less of a financial liability. But nonetheless, you're not getting, it's not exactly worth the cost.
Yeah, no, for sure.
You know, and then the very first thing you read in the case, it says a very important fact about Terry and Phil too, is that neither was hired into the company through the regular hiring process, which was very, very demanding.
Yeah.
So it's like red flag immediately. You got 2 people who shouldn't be there.
Yeah, and especially on Terry, Terry got 5 no's out of that kind of panel of people.
Yes.
Yet they still hired him because he has relationships with the CEO and stuff. Drives me crazy.
Same idea, right? It's not what you know, but who you know.
Yeah. Company politics, man.
Yeah. Anyway, so I mean, so for financial obligation, I mean, I guess I don't know. It just, hence we see the lopsidedness for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So then on a legal obligation, based on what we've learned about employment at will and exceptions, what legal obligations could the manager have to Terry and Phil?
Well, I know with Phil, right? He'd gotten sick there at the end, and there was stuff that went down there. Obviously, that becomes kind of sticky when you're like, even if they've been thinking about firing beforehand, firing him while he's sick and everything on disability, that becomes kind of a sticky situation. So they kind of have a legal obligation to keep him around there.
Agreed. And on my end, it does draw that same emphasis you talked about. To be more particular, that would fall under possibly. Now, this is not guaranteed. Again, this is just possibility of disability discrimination.
Correct. Yeah.
So with that in mind, what about Terry?
Terry, I don't know. They had set that expectation for Terry that what they had said in the case, that if you don't get promoted within the first 3 years at least once, then you're essentially automatically fired. And correct me if I'm wrong, it was Terry, right, that had been there for 6 years? And was that Phil?
I thought, I'm getting mixed up. I thought that was Phil.
Okay. And yeah, I'm having a hard time keeping some of the details straight on both of them.
Right.
Now that you say that, it might have been Phil that had that.
Yeah, Phil. Phil had been with the company for 6. Very, very, very last paragraph.
Okay.
And it had a policy that if you don't get promoted after 3 years, you get fired. Phil had been there for more than 3 years and never got a promotion. And he told me and others that he really expected a promotion. So the big question was what to do with Phil.
Yeah.
So
on Terry's end, though, just looking at it, I mean, I guess they had set an expectation that you're supposed to hit that certain point system, right? It's he had been polling about a 3.5 for a while. and they set an expectation that once you're reduced down to like a 2.5, you're then kind of you're in the red at that point, right? You're kind of in trouble, and you're kind of on that PIP.
Yeah, the first step in firing someone.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I don't know. I don't know about you. I didn't really see any red flags with Terry. It sounded like they were kind of pretty upfront with the dude.
Agreed. The one thing we gotta be careful with Terry is because he's over 40, which they could play that age discrimination on him. And I'm trying to find it in the reading. On my end, it draws attention to a possibility of an implied contract
for Terry. Let's see.
For Terry, and I'm trying to find out where that was. But now, here's what I find interesting. Going back to the readings, though, almost everyone made it seem like have documentation and proof that they are a company. Like, you show the numbers, so it has nothing to do with the individual. It's a numbers thing only. Then most everyone's understandable of termination. Which, that being said, worst case scenario, we're looking at a process to terminate Terry.
Yeah.
Which has its pros and cons. Maybe if Terry realizes the seriousness that we're actually trying to get him terminated, he might actually begin to turn around.
Yeah. Well, and
on the contrary, if not, then we're finally on the right path to getting him gone.
Yeah. No, and they had talked about in the case, right, that there were those occasional times where they came in and gave somebody like a 30-minute notice. How's it going, Jeremy?
Hey, good. Sorry, my phone just got all of the texts that we were sending.
No worries, man. We're just kind of jumping through it here and just going for it.
Jeremy, I'm going to catch you up real quick, all right?
Okay.
So we just discussed the reading about employment at will. So we're just trying to make sure we understand the laws to cover ourselves. Employment at will essentially allows, if there was no direct statement in a contract of time of employment, then there was employment at will, which essentially allows an employer to release an employee at any time with or without reason. Do you agree with that? You on board with that?
Yeah.
Okay. So a lot of people were slightly uncomfortable with that because they felt like that could be abused, didn't want to take advantage of people. So we find out about some of those exceptions, which were generally brought into 3 different groups. And that was breach of implied contract, implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing, and violation of public policy. So breach of implied contract. This is a contract between the employer and employee that is created by the actions of the employer. The employer could imply that the employee will have continued employment by making statements the employee is doing. The employer could also create an implied contract through an employment manual that detail termination practices. For example, a 3 strikes policy that says they have to give you notice before firing. You on board with that?
Yeah.
So the breach of implied covenant of good faith and fair dealing. This could come into play where an employer unfairly tries to avoid doing what they agreed to do under the contract by terminating an employee, such as like a final paycheck or sick leave or something like that. They're just trying to save pennies on the dollar sort of thing by trying to cut them short of that. And lastly, the violation of public policy. So this is kind of like what's assumed by everybody. Terminating an employee for refusing to commit an unlawful act, lying on the books. Some other things that were added, though, that was kind of interesting thought to me was like, if you fired someone because they took time off to serve on jury duty, you cannot do that. Filing for workers' comp, which Nick and I later discussed, because workers' comp is kind of like it's a bigger development other than just the company. And that's why it's considered public policy and not good faith, fair dealing one. And then lastly, refusing to date one's boss and stuff of that sort again. And then lastly, going back to what we discussed at the very beginning of the semester was the discrimination statutes. So the anti-discrimination stuff, such as against race, national origin, gender, religion, the Americans with Disabilities Act, as well as the Age Discrimination in Employment Act.
Okay.
Do you remember all those?
Yeah.
Yeah. So again, pretty up to date on what all that is. So then now we're going into the case. We're talking about Terry and Phil. We first talked about their financial obligation, and plain and simple, we agree that Terry makes no contribution to the company. So all of his salary and benefits are just strictly pure costs to the company. And the company only makes $300,000 a year, so that's a pretty heavy tie.
Yeah.
Phil's not much better, but he's not as bad, financially speaking. Cutting it, but he tries. So now we're talking about the legal obligation side of these things, so things to be concerned with. Phil, we read in his contract that if you weren't promoted within 3 years, essentially you're liable for the employment at will. We can let you go. That was our terms. So that's kind of where we're at with Phil. One thing we do have to be careful of, because he's recently come off of this illness, is the possibility of a disability discrimination.
Yeah, that was my biggest concern with him.
Right. I think everyone kind of sees that as a possibility. Not that it's guaranteed, but as a possibility. And then the last thing for Terry's a little older. He's over 40, so we got to be careful of the age discrimination with him. We're not quite sure, but I missed it in the readings, but there is a possibility of an implied contract. So I'm trying to figure out what was said. I don't know if management, the hiring party, ever may have said something to him that we may not be fully aware of. That's what I'm trying to find.
Sorry, guys.
And we talked about the different reviews. At one point, he was doing okay with a 3.5. Sounds like it might be going down lower.
Yeah.
One thing I brought to attention, though, as Nick and I were talking, was through the reading, it sounded like if I ever disregarding an employee at all, but simply looking at the number side of it, proving that they are not contributing to the company. Here's the numbers, here's the facts, that almost every time that is a legal right to be able to terminate someone.
Okay.
So, and I feel like that's our scapegoat with both of these as we go to prove, like, no promise to them, but nonetheless, here's the numbers, and it's not good for our company to keep these guys hired. But we'll talk about that a little bit more as we go.
Sweet.
All right, so for ethical obligations, what ethical obligations does the manager have to Terry as well as Phil?
I think it's hard to let Phil go just because he just got back off of disability. He has a family he's working for, and it's just the whole company, well, their whole department's tied to him. They've been helping support him during his disability time. They gave him their vacation time. Like, everyone's kind of helping him, and it's like hard to just cut him off after everyone's put so much into helping him stay and helping him get better and seeing him improve. And so I think that's kind of an ethical dilemma.
Yeah, and I mean, I think at the same time, the managers just have a responsibility, or the manager has a responsibility of both of them, just to make sure that he's doing everything he can to help them succeed before he does actually fire him, if he needs to.
Right. Well, and this will just, I feel like it might be easier to kind of just group all these together here. So the other thing is, like, the obligations does the manager have to the company, to its employees, as well as to herself. And some of these all kind of go a little hand in hand rather than answering for each, Terry and Phil. So for, like, the company, employees, and herself, we talk about the rigorous hiring process that is in place. You want the best of the best, and this manager has proven that. Her results have proven that, and so she definitely wants to keep that high bar. So that impacts it. She also wants to reward her employees, like, I don't know. I feel like some of those employees might feel like they kind of got cheated. Why did we bust our butts so hard to just see other lazier people get in and not have to perform at our level?
Yeah.
So I kind of wonder that. However, in the case of Phil, though, this is a little more interesting because Phil, with his illness, a lot of the company rallied behind him, providing assistance. I feel like there might be a connection. So I think if you terminate Phil, that could be a little bit of a demeanor on the employee morale, perhaps, maybe.
Yeah,
I agree.
See that.
And then, and this is something interesting too, and I feel like it's something to move forward with. And we talked about this just briefly previously. Was rather than just letting him go, because that could be confusing. And now I suddenly see how this implied contract came into play. I'm looking at the numbers better. So he had been receiving 3.5s. From his standpoint, he thinks he's safe. These are not accurate numbers, but nonetheless, he thinks he's safe. So to suddenly get blindsided with a 2.5 and get terminated, that's where he might think, I think she's out to get me. Here's all my previous reviews, yada, 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 right?
Yeah.
So with that being said, I think, and this is what we just mentioned, I think it might be good to start a formal termination process. And so maybe not terminate him right now, but to simply say, you got a 2.5. You have another 6 months to turn this around, or you're gone. So it's not instant. It's not right now. You've got another 6 months to turn it around, which one of two things will happen. He will either improve, we'll get a commitment out of him to improve, or we're finally on the right track and we'll finally have him terminated, and he's had essentially a 6 month notice.
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
So
I agree.
That's all I'm giving him.
I think that's totally.
As for Phil, as I read through the story and we see some of the efforts that have been made to kind of create a position for him by giving him other people's work, I have to wonder, can we find more? Can we do more? He's trying. He's not unwilling. He just has a different job qualifications. And so I just still wonder, can we come up with a glorified secretary position or something a little bit more? Even if we try to take it above our department that we manage, but maybe just take it to a company wide and say, hey, we have an employee who is hardworking, just doesn't quite fit our parameters for what we do. Can he serve in a higher calling as a secretary, as a call person or something like that, and then reference more people to different departments that way, something that might work better for him as a whole and maybe for the company as well. It's worked out minorly for us, but he needs something bigger. So maybe if he covered more grounds, maybe it would work then.
Yeah, I think that's helpful. But I think we should also talk to him. And they said they had a problem if he would report his problems to the CEO and complain to the CEO. And I think we need to realign him and help him realize that's not the best thing to do, because that's why the CEO is out to get him and get him fired. And also kind of maybe let him know that he's doing what he can, but we're having trouble finding a position for him. So if he can show, if he can find a niche where he fits in more and can do more for us, we'll be more likely to keep him on.
Right. And we also found out, too, that Phil was the one wanting a promotion. And that's where I think, this is where we got to be clear and upfront with them, and say, Phil, listen, man, I appreciate what you're doing. Here's where we're at. Unfortunately, based on where you've been placed in this company, this is the line of work you are kind of expected to know and do. Now, we've tried to accommodate to you, but nonetheless, without some other position becoming available, this is the work that's expected of you. And because your knowledge and training is not in this department, you're looking at about a 2.5. And I think just laying it out before him so he knows. Even he himself rated himself low. He realizes this is not his department. But that's where it's just like, we appreciate your work ethic. We've seen you try. We've seen you contribute. Hence why we've been happy to try and serve you and your family while you've been down with illness. And we'll continue to try to do so, by trying to seek out another opportunity to kind of come up with a position that might serve the whole company better than just our department. But nonetheless, if we're unable to, it might be better for you and for us if we part ways and allow you to find a track with another company that will allow you to use your skills and training better and maybe allow you to move up in another company.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm thinking.
I agree. I think that's totally fair for him.
Yeah.
All right. So now, aside from those two individuals, we're going to talk about the company's HR practices itself. So, how well is the company in the case doing with its HR practices, generally speaking?
I think they're okay. I mean, their hiring process is rigorous, but not terrible, as long as they follow it. Of course, in Terry's case and Phil's case, they didn't really follow that process. And as far as their firing process goes, I don't love it. I mean, they do the whole grading system down to 2.5, then the basically execution sentence. You're on the green mile, walking out with that PIP.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're mostly good. And I like how the PIP, it takes off the legal pressure from us because we gave them a 2.5. We let them know that they're doing bad, but it seems like there's no way to improve from there. And that's your death sentence, and I don't like that very much. I think it should be more liquid, more ability to jump up from there because you know now, okay, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to.
Yeah.
Right, and I agree. Perhaps one, and this kind of goes in the case of Terry, as we mentioned, maybe it's one of those things like maybe you can get a 2.5 and you have till the next review to improve it. Otherwise, if you get two of them, you're gone. That way they've kind of got a notice. Because like you said, all of a sudden you sit down for review. Hey, we sat down, we discussed it. You're a 2.5. You're not coming back tomorrow. That's a slap in the face. But all of a sudden, if they realize they're on the chopping block, well, and that's what's tough. Right now, it's every 6 months. Maybe if they had a meeting in between or something a little bit less formal halfway, that's like, hey, here's where you're looking at right now. We've got this coming up, and we have our formal review in 3 more months. If you're not up by then, just know that I feel like there needs to be a greater window of preparation, or at least informing them, hey, here's your current status, gonna want to improve.
Well, and maybe if the PIP wasn't such a death sentence, maybe if it really was there for, a help purpose, kind of like, hey, you're on the edge here, but it's more of a help. We're gonna really try and help you instead of like, this is like the final thing we do before we weed you out, and no one really ever comes back from it.
Right. So now this is interesting. It says, do employees get a clear picture from the company how well they are performing?
I don't know. I think with the manager that we were following through the case, she does a pretty good job of being blunt and upfront with them, but it sounds like most of the other managers aren't. They kind of beat around the bush.
Yeah.
Right. And that goes into the next question. Do you think this manager can make good decisions about these two individuals, or does she seem to be influenced by biases that will be hard to overcome?
I think.
So far, yeah, go for it. Sorry.
Oh, she seems pretty like headstrong and like she'll be able to make the right decision based on what she knows, and she's a good manager, so I think she'll make the right decision. She's gonna have opposition in firing Terry because upper level management is good friends with him, but I think she'll make the right decision in the end because she knows what'll improve her team's performance overall.
Yeah, I was going to kind of echo the same thing. It sounds like she has a pretty darn good head on her shoulders and sees clearer than most of the rest of the company does.
Okay. And I agree. I feel like her success has come from her determination and doing what she feels and believes is right. Hence all the performance from her group. And I think she'll continue to do so. I agree with the idea that she's got some speed bumps she has to overcome. So, all right. So with that, then we go into our statements. So Nick, I'm going to start with you.
Yeah.
What is your decision to do with Phil and then with Terry?
With Phil, so Phil's the sick one. I mean, more than Terry, I think Phil should be given more of a chance. I think they could spend a little bit more time with Phil and see if, like we talked about a little bit earlier, maybe we could find another position in the company. Maybe there's some other way to make it work with Phil. For Terry, after evaluating everything and really looking at his performance reviews, he's not really cutting it. He's there on the grace of others, kind of like stepping in for him. His connections, his relationships are really the only thing that's tying him to the company at this point. I'd kind of begin the firing process with Terry. With Phil, I may give it a little bit more time. That'd be my final decision for them.
Yeah. Then for me, with Terry, I'd give him a 2.5, kind of take him down the PIP route, firing route, because we haven't seen lots of improvement. And if he does end up improving, we can keep him on and make it work, but I don't see that happening. And with Phil, I'd kind of work with him and try to keep him improving because I think he could be a good employee. He just doesn't have a place to work right now. He doesn't fit in. So if we could find a place for him to fit in, I think it'd be better.
Awesome. And we have some follow-up questions with these, and we've discussed these throughout the case, so like it falls into place. It talks about what are alternatives to firing Terry. I think all three of us have agreed that there is a sense of implied contract because of the false reviews he's received priorly. So I think we need to put on pace. And I think if we give him a 2.5 status, but don't fire him this time, but give him a window of improvement, that kind of creates that opportunity to dismiss that implied contract because now he's on the chopping block for at least 6 months. He's aware of it and needs to improve. He can't be blinded by that. Then it talks about, too, what is the message for firing or not firing Terry send to the other employees?
I think it makes it hard to fire anyone else in the future that's, performing better at all than Terry is, which is essentially a non-contribution.
Right. Well, and I agree. I think Terry needs to go. Like I said, I feel like the other team might feel threatened. Like, how did this guy get on, not work as hard, not know as much? Why should I bust my butt so hard and not? My job's safe. Terry's safe. So I think Terry's a weak link for sure. So I think he needs to go. For Terry's sake, I don't think we can just drop him. I think at least he'll be on the chopping block for 6 months, and I kind of think it might reflect itself. And I think the employees will see that, which might also help show that we carry a big stick. We're being serious now.
Yeah.
So I think that could be respected. And then lastly, talk about. Go ahead, Jeremy.
I was gonna say, if I was like an employee under her and I saw her fire Terry, I'd be more impressed with her just because management's giving her such a hard time with it. And if you can see that as an employee and you see them stick up for what they believe, I think that says a lot about their character. And I think that's really good for the employees under her. It might gain some respect for her.
You know, and I agree with that. I certainly think there's an element to that for sure. And then lastly, Nick, did you have a comment?
No. Actually, go for it. Go for it.
Okay. So the very last thing was, are there any creative options that might work? And I think ultimately the two biggest things was giving a period for improvement for Terry, and then assessing where Phil's at so he knows and realizes why he hasn't been promoted, but then giving him maybe some hope that we're going to try to perhaps consider another position for him.
Yeah.
So, okay. So here we go. We got two last very short parts, hopefully, and we'll be done. Nick, I hope you're doing okay on time.
I'm cut out a little early. I did already read the last portion though. I kind of went ahead and read that before the meeting, and she actually handled it really well from what I saw. I won't.
Okay, Nick, if you don't mind, I'm just going to turn that time over to you. Can you just fill us in then?
So essentially, what she did, and let me just to make sure I'm refreshed on it a little bit, pull it up. Just to make sure I know which one she did which for. So Terry, she sat down with Terry and essentially really laid it out with him. She leveled with Terry and said, you know what, you had gotten a 3.5 before. I'm giving you a 2.5. He was shocked. He thought he was going to get at least a 3. That's what he had put down on his form. And then she goes forward to basically say, you know what, Terry, this is my team. This is what I'm trying to do, trying to create an environment of superstars. You know, what do you think of this person on the team? And she kind of like went through all the people on her team. And Terry agreed, like, you know, they really are a superstar. Michael's awesome. Or what's her face? There's another name on here. He was like, that person's awesome too. And then she asked Terry, like, do you feel like you fit in with the team? And he basically said no. From there, she said that she was going to give him a 2.5, but she wasn't going to put him on PIP. She didn't feel like that was respectful to him or to Terry. And then she told Terry essentially that, what was it? She was either going to give him, basically she was going to open it up to the whole company and see if he might be able to fit in anywhere else, see if they could find a good position for him. And if not, she said, you know what, if we can't find a good position for him, then why don't you go out with a party, go out with a big bang, hold your head high, and know that you were never on PIP. So there was that for Terry. And then on Phil, well, actually, and then Terry went on to find a different job. He spent more time in scuba and then eventually got a job in an engineering company and was promoted to manager and had a lot of success with it because it was pure engineering, math and equations. And then for Phil, that was a little bit more interesting. He came back eventually. Everybody had rallied around him while he was sick. But during the time that he was gone, they had hired a replacement for him in that position and basically had thought to themselves, okay, we'll kind of find somewhere else for him to slip in when he gets back. Let's see. I'm going to kind of read this last paragraph.
Go for it.
Said I gave him a 3 on his reviews. The time it took me to manage him wasn't a big deal. So they kind of brought him back to a different-ish position, and he was in there. So it was basically it. Because he knew my boss had a vendetta against him, he decided to leave the soft goods team. When I left the company, he moved to another team. I took him because he was a free slot. I think he ended up on on the international team, basically just making sure products were good for different countries, French friendly and German friendly. They continued to be friends. He kept getting 3.0s. About a year later, he was diagnosed with an inoperable brain cancer, left the company for good, and died not too long after that. So kind of a morbid ending for.
Interesting.
But I thought she handled it pretty darn well. I mean, especially with Terry. Phil, it kind of just followed the normal path. Terry, I feel like she did a good job of leveling with him.
Perfect. I agree. Well, it sounds like the results are a lot like what we said it should be.
Yeah.
I really respect her effort with Terry on how to walk away without doing the PIP. I thought that was super cool.
Yeah.
So, anyway. All right. So the very last thing, if we have just 2 minutes.
Yeah.
What can we learn from this moving forward for any future cases or anything like that?
I think for me, it's important to handle it with sensitivity, but also make sure you do what's right for your team and your company.
Well said.
I think
Jeremy, any thoughts?
always just kind of think about the people you're working with, and you have to do what's going to be best for the company in the end, but work with the people too, and you can usually find like a happy medium place where the person you're working with can be happy and the company can be happy too.
You know, I couldn't agree more. I definitely think it still comes down to you're working with people. You're not working with robots. You're working with people. You know, you're trying to keep those relationships healthy, respectful. You know, I look back on the example of that last case. Something that I thought was neat was how she sat down with Terry and said, hey, look at who we've brought on board. Look at where you're at. You know, are you comfortable being in the midst of this team, of this group of people, and where we're at right now? You know, because you're not dumb. You're not naive to the fact of knowing I'm a bottom performer right now. Nonetheless, you kind of get a perspective of seeing where a company's going, and you think to yourself, is that where I'm going? Am I on board with that? So I kind of think that was neat. Nonetheless, to bring all of your employees up to par, saying, here's where we're going, are all of you on board? You know? And if they're not, then you know that that's your anchor slowing you down. So I thought that was cool. Anyway, I think that does it for tonight. Any other thoughts?
Sounds good to me, guys.
Awesome. Jeremy, I'm glad you could join us. Nick, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
For sure. Tuesday night, 8 o'clock.
Tuesday night's the plan.
Okay.
Well, I may have to.
We'll see you guys then.
Yeah, I appreciate meeting you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Have a good night.
We'll see y'all.